Okay, Nigel. You've been in the parliament for 20 years. I'm a newcomer. I'm new in politics, and I've only been half a year in the parliament. What's your best advice?
Well, like you, I was brand new. I was just turned 35 when I first came here. I'd been in business for 18 years before I became an MEP, so I was a complete outsider coming into politics. And it's very interesting. Within the first few weeks of being here, I began to understand why people go native, why people change, because actually it's very tempting. You know, you've got lunches to go to, lobbyists will buy you dinner, there's no need to pay for alcohol because that's all provided free, generous daily allowances, and for a lot of people who come into this job, this gives them an income which is more than they would earn in the real world. There's no chance of being sacked really, and if you're high up on a party list, you just get re-elected. The pensions are good, and it's a natural thing for human beings to want to be liked by the group of people they're with. Now, your position is very similar to mine because you come in from a political party that's had a lot of controversy around it. Strikes quite a strong tone when it comes to large-scale mass immigration, when it comes to the powers of the European Commission. And I think what will happen is they will do their best to try and intoxicate you, to try and charm you, to try and buy you. Well, she's a nice-looking woman. I mean, surely, she will become one of us. And I've seen lots of people here who've become one of them, who've lost their principles and become part of the machine. So I'm not going to give you any advice, but I'm going to plead with you to remember who your voters are. Your voters are ordinary, decent, working people who live in Sweden, who believe in the country, who believe in Europe, but not this Europe, not the Europe of the von der Leyens, the Junckers. So just stick to your principles. That's my strong advice to you.
So how did you do? How did you stick to your principles?
Well, do you know what? I learned very early on that being a pantomime villain was quite fun. So I get up in the chamber, and in some of the big dramatic debates, I mean, as soon as my name's called out, 400 people start booing. Well, of course, I just love this. Hand it up, when I first came here, it was very difficult. In about 2006-07, I began to wonder whether I'd stand again for re-election, because it was very difficult to get. You came here, and getting noticed was very, very difficult. Mainstream media not interested, and then something called YouTube hove into view, and there's no doubt about it. YouTube made my career. YouTube made UKIP a big national party. YouTube helped us win the European elections of 2014. So I was able to use social media, and suddenly then, because of what was happening in the chamber, because Schultz would be screaming at me, this kind of thing going on, and then once I got big hits on YouTube, then actually the world's media started watching it. So I enjoyed being the pantomime villain, and you know what? If people say rude things to me in the lift, they're just a bunch of losers anyway. I mean, they don't pass the Farage test, so I have two criteria. Right? Every human being is judged by these two criteria. Number one, would I employ them? And number two, would I want to have a drink with them? And most people that work in these institutions fail on both criteria. So I couldn't give a damn what they think about me.
Well, you've been aiming for this goal for 20 years at least.
Yep.
And now you're here, you achieved it. What does it feel like?
Extraordinary. Extraordinary. When I think back to me walking through the doors here in July 1999, the European Parliament building was brand new, and there were three of us from UKIP that came here, and we were literally, we were the three secessionists. We were the only three in the entire Parliament who thought their countries ought to leave. And in terms of UK public opinion, leaving the European Union was a minority sport. I mean, this was not mainstream at all. I mean, it really wasn't. I remember my first ever appearance on BBC's Question Time. That's our big weekly debate show in the UK. It's a massive programme still. And I remember my first appearance, and the host, David Dimbleby, done it for decades. You know, the European question came up, and Dimbleby pointing at me on BBC and saying, "And you, Nigel Farage, you have admitted in a conversation to wanting to leave the Europe." I mean, as if I'd endorsed paedophilia, or it was extraordinary. I mean, you know, you go to a dinner party in London and you'd venture the view that we should leave the EU. I mean, you wouldn't be invited back.
But it's like being opposed to mass migration.
Of course. So when I think about the little acorns from which we began, to finally be at the point where in 5.5 weeks' time we are actually going to be packing up the contents of our, it's an amazing feeling. I'm the only person that has been saying this all through these years. And as the years have gone by, others have joined me. Boris Johnson, of course, for the referendum campaign. But for me, it's an incredible sense of achievement. I sometimes wonder how I stuck at this. Because I've literally been doing this 7 days a week for over 2 decades. It's almost become my religion. You know, I believed in it so much. So no, I couldn't be happier, to be honest.
So you haven't ever felt any doubt?
Do you know, it was a very big moment here for me. It was at the time of the European Constitution. And I was heavily involved in the French referendum campaign, helping get money into the French campaign, etc. And I remember the French voting no to the European Constitution. A few days later, the Dutch voting overwhelmingly no to the EU Constitution. And I thought then, well, we've won. You know, the whole direction of the European project will change. You know, within a week, we were back here in Strasbourg. They'd rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty, not given up a single power, and I thought, you bastards. I thought, how disgusting you people are. So ever since that moment in 2006, I haven't just been advocating that the UK should leave the European Union. I've been advocating that Europe should leave the European Union. I've been a sworn opponent of the entire project since that time, because I realised then how fundamentally, not even undemocratic, anti-democratic, the whole thought process is here in Brussels and Strasbourg. So I'm utterly repelled by the whole thing, and now they want to militarise it. You know, they want an army, an air force, a navy. They want to expand. They want to use their muscle. And how the hell a neutral country like Sweden can even contemplate being a part of that is beyond me. But of course, you know, what people need to know is it's because the political class, the media class, the civil service class are literally bought off by this place. You know, forget what MEPs earn. Look at what people working in the European Commission earn. Do you know, there are 10,000 officials in Brussels that earn more than the British Prime Minister. I mean, so this is how they've done it. They've done it through a form of bribery. So look, I'm very hopeful that the UK leaving and prospering will lead us towards something very different. Already we see in Poland, we see in Hungary, we see in the Czech Republic, we see in Slovakia, countries that have got very strong rooted identities, countries in which Christianity, interestingly, is still very, very strong. Countries that have lived under the Nazis, lived under communism, and only had freedom for 3 decades. And they're beginning to see these politically correct institutions criticising them for their culture and the way in which they live. So I'm actually optimistic that, Brexit will start a process where the EU as we currently know it will disintegrate. And do you know something? If in years to come we had a Europe which was sovereign democratic nation states having a forum in which to meet, agreeing that we have to deal with cross-border crime, we have to deal with pollution which crosses borders, we have to deal, you know, we're neighbours living in a street. You know, what UK industry does with prevailing westerly wind affects what happens in Scandinavia. You know, we are interconnected and interrelated in remarkable ways. But if this became a Europe of friends cooperating, I'd be 100% in favour of it. The fact is, it's not that. It is a Europe in which the nation states cede, give away, surrender their ability through the ballot box to make decisions to a bunch of unelected old men in Brussels. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Do you think more countries will try to leave?
I think it depends on what the perception of Brexit is. So obviously we're leaving, but there are more negotiations to be done in terms of the future shape of a trade deal. I think that Monsieur Barnier will try and make this as difficult as possible. He's desperate for us not to become competitive. It's interesting, isn't it? You know, that's the one thing in his mind. We mustn't allow the Brits to be successful. I think Boris has gained confidence in the last few weeks. I think my helping Boris made a huge difference in the election. But Boris knows if he messes this up, I'm still around. And they won't want that. They won't want that. So I think we're going to see a more robust British government. I'm certainly hopeful of that. And I think if in 2 or 3 years' time we've completely left and we're doing well, then I think in countries like Denmark, inevitably the conversation about leaving will happen. I was very interested that in Poland yesterday there was some opinion polling that showed the majority of Poles now think they'd be better off outside the EU. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you know, and amazing, and even in countries like Italy, you know, the politicians may not reflect it. You know, you have to explain to people what leaving really means. You know, leaving is taking back democratic control of your own destiny. I mean, who wouldn't want to be in control of their own destiny? It's a very normal human condition to want something like that.
What are the main challenges in the UK in the short run and the long run, apart from Brexit
well, I think the north-south divide. London is an utterly dominant city. All the money's there, all the wealth's there, all the investment's there. It's got full employment. It's, you know, I mean, in terms of, and you go further north, and we're not talking vast distances. You know, you go, well, in your, I mean, I was going to say 200 miles, but sort of, in your language, 300 kilometres or whatever they call it. Yeah, I mean, you go 300 k's north, and you find that people's job opportunities are fewer. You find public infrastructure in terms of roads and railway connections is inferior. You find mobile phones don't work in half the areas, literally. You find broadband connectivity is very patchy, and people's life expectancy is years lower than people living in London. A massive disparity between the north and the south. And I think, John, I mean, those northern voters started voting for me in UKIP. They overwhelmingly voted for me in the Brexit Party, and they've now gone to Boris. You know, they're Boris's voters, and say Boris has to find a way to spend money wisely to bring the north of England up to a better standard than it currently is. I think that's a huge challenge. Scotland's an enormous challenge. You know, we have this. It's funny, isn't it? Scottish nationalism, because it's pro-EU, everyone thinks it's nice and cuddly and fluffy. Any other form of nationalism, whether it's mine or yours, they think it's repulsive. You know, Catalonia. Nobody in this place speaks up for the jailed Catalan leaders because they're anti-EU. These are the double standards that we see. So dealing with Scotland, dealing with the Union, they're massive issues. Dealing with the north-south divide, they're massive issues. And thirdly, I would say this, refinding our place in the world. Because of our history, our very recent history, you know, we do have a very different position in the world to every other country in Europe. I mean, the Queen, our magnificent Queen, you know, is head of the Commonwealth, you know, an association of former colonies with whom we're friendly. I mean, no other country in history has kept good relations with its former colonies, but we have. We have the Commonwealth Games, our own sort of Olympics. Remarkable. And if you look at the Commonwealth, if you add in the United States of America, it's 2.7 billion people out there speak English, have British law. I've been with us in our big crises of the 20th century, sent their men and women to come and support us and fight with us and help us. So I think the other big thing post-Brexit is the United Kingdom re-establishing its place in the world. And I'm very excited by that. I think that being part of the European Union has really held us back, inhibited us. You know, I don't want the empire back, But I do think that the UK has got a much more constructive role to play on the world stage, and one of the areas we ought to be doing that is, I mean, so many of the African countries who are making progress, they've got huge social problems, but they are making progress. What does the EU do? It goes and rapes and pillages their fisheries. It puts massive tariffs on their exports to us. You know, whether it's the Ghanaians producing cocoa products, chocolate products, or whatever. And I would like to think that we could, as a country, start to help the poorer developing countries once we're freed from, and let's face it, I mean, the European Union is run by half a dozen big companies. The big banks, the big companies run the whole thing. And they do it for their benefit, not for anybody else's, and certainly not for the poor in the world. And you listen to all the socialists and the Greens and the Liberals all talking about giving foreign aid to people. Well, actually, the better way to do it would be allow them to trade with us more easily. So things like that, where I think we can play a big role.
A lot of young people are Remainers and really like or pro-EU. What do you say to them, and why?
Well, when the Swedes had their vote on joining the euro, what was noticeable was nearly 70% of young Swedes voted against. When you look at the growth of the Five-Star movement in Italy, it's nearly all under 40. When you look at Marine Le Pen's vote in France, you'll find that actually, amongst the under 30s, she was the most popular. So, around Europe, there are quite a lot of left and right wing movements that are rebellious about Brussels, where young people make up the votes. In Britain, it's the other way round. I think it's because we didn't join the euro. I think if we joined the euro, an economic catastrophe had come to Britain, the young would be against it. And I think there is a broader debate in our country, in America and elsewhere, about the university system. And frankly, the brainwashing that's been given to our youngsters, and I feel pretty appalled by that.
In schools and universities.
Schools and universities. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoy yourself.